Some empires begin in marble halls, under ancient crowns, with power already inherited. The Mongol Empire did not. It began in hunger, betrayal, and exposure, in the kind of childhood that usually ends in silence, not glory. That is what makes this story so hard to forget. Because the boy at its center did not inherit safety, a throne, or a kingdom. He inherited loss, yet within a single lifetime, that same boy would help create an empire so fast, so organized, and so feared that it shattered dynasties, destroyed cities, redrew trade routes, and changed Eurasia from northern China to the edges of Europe. Welcome to English Mindwave. If you enjoy learning English through powerful historical stories, please subscribe and support the channel. In 1206, on the grasslands of Inner Asia, Temujin was proclaimed Chinggis Khan. To later generations, that can look like the birth of a conqueror. But it was also the arrival of a new kind of power, built from discipline, mobility, fear, memory, and structure. And once it began to move, the world felt it. To understand how that happened, the story has to return to the steppe before there was an empire at all. This was not an empty land, and it was not a peaceful one. It was a world of tribes, raids, alliances, revenge, and sudden collapse. Power never stood still for long. A leader could rise quickly and disappear just as quickly. Nothing felt permanent, not friendship, not status, not even survival. Temujin was born into that unstable world, probably in the 1160s. His father, Yesuge, was a minor chieftain. His mother, Hoelun, would become one of the great survivors of the story. When Temujin was still young, his father was poisoned, and everything around the family collapsed. Their followers abandoned them. Protection vanished. Food became uncertain. Life narrowed into roots, fish, cold, and endurance. That beginning mattered. Temujin learned that kinship could fail. He learned that loyalty could disappear the moment power weakened. He learned that on the steppe, weakness was dangerous. At one point, he was captured and later escaped. He built alliances because he had to. A crucial turning point came when his wife, Bort, was abducted in a raid. Her rescue strengthened key alliances and pushed Temujin deeper into the brutal politics of the steppe. History often makes successful rulers look inevitable after they win. Temujin was not inevitable. Many men on the steppe knew hardship. Many knew violence. Many wanted power. Most disappeared into history without leaving much behind. So the real question is not why Temujin fought. Many fought. The real question is why he succeeded where so many others failed. The answer begins not with fury, but with structure. This is the point many people miss about the Mongols. They remember the horses, the arrows, the speed, and the burning cities. But speed without organization becomes chaos. Courage without system burns out. Temujin understood that the old tribal order was too unstable to create lasting power. It tied men to lineage, clan prestige, and inherited rank. That made alliances fragile and rebellion easy. So he changed the rules. He promoted men for loyalty, usefulness, and ability, not only for noble ancestry. He reorganized warriors into decimal units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This was not only a military reform, it was a political revolution. Tribal identities were weakened. Defeated groups were often absorbed. Loyalty moved upward toward the new ruler. That was the real beginning of the empire, not the coronation, not the first famous conquest. The true beginning was the moment Temujin understood that conquest without reorganization would collapse back into tribal chaos. He was not merely gathering followers, he was building a machine. By the time he was proclaimed Chinggis Khan in 1206, the deepest transformation had already taken place. The tribes had not only been subdued, they had been rearranged into a new political order, and now that order moved outward. Too often, the Mongols are reduced to a simple image: wild horsemen riding out of nowhere to destroy richer and more settled civilizations. But raiders do not build the largest contiguous land empire in history. Raiders do not coordinate campaigns across continents. Raiders do not create durable systems of intelligence, communication, and rule. The Mongols became a war state. Their cavalry moved with astonishing speed because each warrior often controlled multiple horses during a campaign. Their composite bows were devastating from horseback. Their tactics included encirclement, feigned retreat, sudden concentration of force, and precise timing. But battlefield skill was only part of the picture. Scouts moved ahead. Routes were studied. Divisions inside enemy states were identified. Information mattered. Planning mattered. Surprise mattered. And the Mongols were willing to learn. When they faced walls, they adapted. When they faced fortified cities, they recruited engineers from conquered peoples. Techniques from China and the Islamic world became part of Mongol power. At first, the Mongols moved against Western Xia, and then the Jin dynasty in northern China. Even these powers began to crack under Mongol pressure. In 1215, Zhongdu, near present-day Beijing, fell. The message was unmistakable. The steppe was no longer standing outside the great civilizations. It was entering them by force. Then came the campaign that turned Mongol power into something far larger than a regional phenomenon. In 1218, relations with the Khwarezmian Empire seemed to open through trade. But after a Mongol caravan was seized at Otrar, and Mongol envoys were humiliated and killed, Chinggis Khan answered with overwhelming violence. Beginning in 1219, Mongol armies moved into Central Asia and Iran and unleashed one of the most devastating campaigns of the medieval world. Cities such as Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench became symbols of both Mongol brilliance and Mongol terror. The campaigns were astonishing in coordination and terrifying in effect. The Mongols did not rely on military skill alone. They made fear into a weapon. Destruction became part of the method. Their reputation began to travel faster than their horses. When Chinggis Khan died in 1227, the empire he left behind was already immense. But the clearest proof of Mongol strength came after his death. It did not immediately collapse. That fact matters enormously. Many conquerors blaze across history and vanish the moment they die. But the Mongol Empire kept moving. That means Chinggis Khan had done something harder than conquest. He had built continuity. After political struggle, his son Ojide became Great Khan in 1229. Under him, expansion accelerated. But something else also became clearer. The Mongol Empire was becoming not only a machine of conquest, but a system of rule. Karakoram developed as an imperial center. Administration expanded. Taxation became more regular. Communication networks grew stronger through relay stations that later formed the Yam system. These details may sound less dramatic than battle, but they explain endurance. Speed can win territory. Only organization can hold it. And still, the conquests continued. In the east, the Jin dynasty finally fell in 1234. In the west, Batu and Subutai drove Mongol armies deep into Eastern and Central Europe. Major forces were defeated in Poland and Hungary in 1241. And then, suddenly, they turned back. A major reason was dynastic politics. Ogedi had died, and succession matters pulled the ruling family back into its own internal struggles. Even at the height of expansion, the empire remained tied to inheritance, legitimacy, and family rule. Royal women also played decisive roles in regency, diplomacy, succession, and imperial survival. They were part of the machinery of empire. Under Mongke, the empire entered another great phase of expansion. Kublai campaigned deeper into China. Hulegu marched westward, and in 1258 captured Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate there as a major political institution. And yet, by this point, limits were beginning to appear. In 1260, a Mongol force was defeated by the Mamluks at Ayin Jalut. Soon after, Mongke's death triggered another succession struggle, this time between Kublai and Arik Boke. Kublai eventually prevailed, but the conflict revealed something deeper. The empire had grown so vast that unity itself was becoming difficult to preserve. From here, the Mongol world divided into major khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Iran, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde across the Western Steppe. They shared Chinggisid heritage, but practical unity weakened. This was not a sudden ending. It was a transformation. Fragmentation did not mean irrelevance. The empire broke apart, but Mongol power remained. In many places, the Mongols became rulers within civilization, not just destroyers outside it. This is also why the Mongol age changed Eurasia so deeply. Under Mongol Hachuko rule, movement across parts of Eurasia became more secure and more connected. Merchants traveled farther. Envoys crossed greater distances. Goods, ideas, religions, and technologies moved more easily across the continent. The Mongols did not invent the Silk Roads, but they tightened them, widened them, and made them more consequential. And that achievement carried a shadow. The increasingly linked Eurasian world of the Mongol Age helped create the conditions through which catastrophe, including the Black Death, could spread with devastating force. Still, Mongol power had limits. Kublai's invasions of Japan failed in part because storms destroyed invasion fleets. Campaigns in Vietnam and Java struggled with climate, logistics, and fierce resistance. They were astonishingly adaptable. But they were not unstoppable. By the 14th century, the different Khanates were increasingly shaped by their regional worlds. In China, the Yuan dynasty weakened until Ming forces drove it from China proper in 1368. Elsewhere, Mongol successor states fractured and survived in altered forms. But the story does not end neatly there. That is one reason the Mongol Empire remains so important. Its unity died in stages. Its influence did not. To claim descent from Chinggis Khan, or to rule through his legacy, remained politically powerful for centuries. The Mongols did not merely conquer territory. They changed the political imagination of Inner Asia and beyond. They reshaped warfare through mobility, discipline, intelligence, and integrated logistics. They changed the relationship between nomadic and sedentary worlds. And that leaves behind the paradox that makes the Mongol story so unforgettable. In many lands, they arrived as devastators. Cities burned, populations shattered, dynasties collapsed. Yet in the generations that followed, Mongol rulers often became patrons of trade, administration, culture, and exchange. That is why the Mongols resist every easy label. They were brutal, but not mindless, destructive, but deeply organizational. They used terror, but terror alone cannot explain what they built. And perhaps that is the final truth beneath all of it. The Mongols did not simply conquer the medieval world. They changed the systems through which it moved, traded, fought, ruled, and remembered power. The empire fractured. The influence endured.